going to transition to our NASCA top 10. A lot of the themes you just heard in the Michigan story around transitioning to their ERP, we're going to talk about right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over NASCA's top 10. We also have Secretary Brennan from the state of Wisconsin on the line today. So I'm going to go over what we heard, some of the aggregate trends when we talked to all 50 states about what's happening in state government. I'm going to go over 5 of them, and then we're going to jump to Wisconsin and really hear what's happening on the ground with the state. So before we kick off, is there anything that you want to say? We've got Secretary Brennan on the line.
I just, again, Jamie, happy to join you and look forward to sharing what we're doing a little bit in Wisconsin here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time today. We know that there's a lot going on right now in the world, as well as several states are in session. So first off, as you can see in front of you, we have the top 10. What we did is we interviewed all of our state chief administrators around the country, and then we took the last 2 months to really aggregate these trends. So I'm going to go over the top 5, and I'll go to the next slide. What we're going to dive deep into is really high-level trends. What's on the horizon for 2021? Just some high-level trends that we found. There was a big focus on current employees, a lot around mental health, a lot around burnout, what's keeping employees engaged. What was really interesting is when we typically do this survey, we see a lot on recruitment, on getting new employees. And so for the first time since we've done this survey, there was much more of a focus on the health and well-being of current employees over recruitment. So we thought that was an interesting trend. As you'll see, for the first time in our NASCA top 10, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion on that top 10. So that looks different in every state. That may look like getting more local businesses involved in procurement, or that may look like having your workforce be more representative in state government. And then another interesting trend is really leveraging operations to aid in some policy social goals. So whether that's leveraging state purchasing to buy more from small businesses or from your local economy, or whether that is having your workforce be reflective of your state demographic. So really how your operations also looks like those policy goals. We could not talk about top 10 without talking about revenue projections and how that continues to be moving targets. But what's also interesting is when we were talking to states and we've been doing these interviews, is they've done a lot of, just because of tight budgets, homegrown solutions, really using the capacity and staff you currently have. And then once you know why you need a vendor, having really specific targeted vendor solutions with these tight budgets. And then as well, there'll be new federal administration's policy shifts and funding priority shifts that will happen in this new year. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to focus on budget for a second. Just some high-level budget trends of what we saw across the country is those, and I'm sure we'll hear the Wisconsin story here in a second, but the revenue projections continue to be moving targets. On average, for most states for fiscal year 2021, it was not as drastic as originally predicted. And then we kind of already talked about some homegrown solutions with really specific vendor solutions. And then there was different strategies used around the country on really what levers they use to respond to the budget. So in 23 states, they had very targeted cuts to different agencies, whereas in the previous year, there's a lot of across the board cuts. So there's across the board cuts in about 9 states. Another lever that a lot of states used was eliminating vacant positions or having hiring freezes, as well as transferring funds from one-time funding to be able to fill the budget gap. But also was an interesting trend when we looked at all the states is there was several states that were able to give raises. So we had 18 states that gave some type of across-the-board raise, and then 9 states that have merit raises. So that was an interesting trend as well. And this is from our partners at NASCA. So let's go to the next slide. 3 other big high-level trends were customer service and customer experience. And this was both on how the departments of administration work with their customers across the state government, really being responsive to their needs, to health and human services needs, to corrections needs, really being the trust with agency relationships and the confidence that the Department of Administration can answer that need. Another big trend we saw was data management and analytics. So what was the infrastructure, the governance to make different data platforms talk to each other? And then very similar, digital government. So what was also interesting is during COVID, there was a lot of new digital platforms that rolled out for the citizens to be able to interact with government, as well as digital government for internal government. We saw e-procurement platforms, we saw e-signature platforms, we saw digital training. So a lot of digital government was talked about over the last year and will continue to be a trend in the next year. And the next one, and then we're going to go to what's happening in Wisconsin, is, and I kind of alluded to this, the diversity, equity, and inclusion in procurement. So for several states, and I put Minnesota on here because they've been working on this for a while, this has really become a priority for them a couple years ago, but you're also seeing both red and blue states make this a priority for purchasing. So here's a couple of recent news articles from our partners over in New Mexico and in Nebraska on how they can leverage state purchasing to help local businesses, to help female businesses, to help minority-owned businesses, really using state purchasing dollars to help that economic development of small and local businesses, making it easier for those businesses to do government with the state. So with that, I know we've gone over a lot, kind of high-level trends. What does this look like in the state of Wisconsin?
Thanks, Jamie. And I think it's, I think for lots of us, we're either in the midst of or entering budget time, and in Wisconsin, that's no different. The governor will introduce our biennial budget for the next 2 years in about 2.5 weeks. And so we have spent the last 5 months, really 6 months, putting that together. And in some ways, getting ready for what comes next. And during the course of the last 6 months, starting in the end of the previous fiscal year, the governor in the closing weeks of that called for about $70 million of reductions in general purpose revenue across the enterprise. We did another $300 million in the current fiscal year. So in Wisconsin, we cut about $370 million out of the general purpose revenue across, although targeted in some places. We did spare places like the Department of Workforce Development, who's been on the front lines with unemployment insurance and the overwhelming needs there. So we've done all that in preparation for the end of the current fiscal year and giving us as much as we could to have us have the largest balance possible moving into the next biennium. And as is the case in lots of places, the news gets marginally better all the time. Yesterday, our Legislative Fiscal Bureau, they put out their estimates for the end of the current fiscal year and into the next biennium, and they're better by about a little over $1 billion across that time. And so it gives us a little bit more flexibility as we move into what that's going to look like and where our investments are going to be. Going back 6 months to the beginning of the budget process, the instructions that I sent out or that we sent out on behalf of the governor across the enterprise were, no new positions because of where we were in a fiscal standpoint, putting a premium on the basic vital services that we have, but also ensuring that the two things that we put as priorities were equity and sustainability. And so equity is something I think that it gets into the next set of slides I think you're going to talk about too, but it's something that is hugely important for us. And maybe the other thing I'll say about the things that you brought up there on the data management and analytics side, Wisconsin, no different than lots of other states, was truly overwhelmed when it came to unemployment insurance and the needs that were immediate in March. We have a system, that's 50 years old in terms of some of the hardware and challenges that we have faced over time. And there's a need for overall modernization of that moving forward. But like several other states did, we used Google. We saw what was going on in other places. We used their predictive analytics to help curb the backlog that we had and bring us to, there are really only two things. Without being able to replace the system immediately, you can work on some technology from the outside or people. And we employed both. We took people from across the enterprise, put them into the unemployment insurance system and did that work. But then we had to also rely, as other states did, on and they're better than Band-Aids, but they're the work that we could do on the technology side to try to meet those demands. And to the credit of our partners and the people we've been working with, I think we've done a lot better, but that came after some very challenging times, and we all know the stories in our states of people who waited months for that relief to come, and the way that affected their lives. So there's lots of those things that we've been doing, a lot of things that we've done on the delivery of virtual services, virtual bid openings, things like that, the use of DocuSign. When you have 70%, we still have about 70% of the state workforce working remotely. In order to do that, you have to be able to have the tools so that people can effectively do their day jobs, in addition to all of the extra work and the real vital services that we have done. We're in Wisconsin, we got about $2 billion in the coronavirus relief fund, and the administration and those funds, a lot of those went through the Department of Administration too, and across the enterprise. So there's a lot of ways in which the priorities that you lay out are things that we have lived over the last several months and will continue to be employing. One other note that I'd make of just things that changed on the fly, that there may be a long-term change coming with, things like in the Department of Motor Vehicles. Wisconsin, probably amongst other states, we went from having to, I remember when I was 16, having to take my driver's test, as did everybody, as do many others. Well, in the time of the height of the pandemic, when we couldn't do that, the DMV and the Department of Transportation moved to a different system, and they found out that worked, and there were other innovations that worked, and they may be looking at doing some of those changes more permanently, or doing that over a longer period of time. So I think that's where we're all coming to. But again, and I'll finish, then I'll let you maybe go into what the next round of these, but across everything that we're doing, and I don't think Wisconsin's different than other states, diversity, equity, and inclusion are all part of, whether it's in the procurement side or whether it's about the employees and attracting, retaining employees. In late 2019, Governor Evers here in Wisconsin put out an executive order around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every agency was required by the end of 2020 to do their own equity plan. We'll be we're coordinating a conversation next week across the enterprise with all of my cabinet colleagues and all of their departments to talk about the execution and the optimization of those things. There's an equity council, both set up with people inside state government, but also outside in the private sector, that will start to meet in February. And the charge there is to deliver to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and to the Department of Administration, all the things that we can be doing to increase and to really activate and operationalize equity across our efforts in Wisconsin. Because as everybody understands, we've kind of reached this inflection point when it comes to our workforce, and we need to be focused very directly on the current workforce we have. And when 2/3 of people looking for a job and more than half of people who are in these jobs want diversity to be part of their experience and are demanding it, we need to be responsive to that. And that's not something that started with COVID-19. I think in lots of places we've been working on that, but it's something certainly that's been heightened. And as we're thinking about how do we all want to continue to evolve into being employers of choice, and when others have options out there, I think those are areas where we really want to ensure that we're trying to be on the forefront and trying to lead the way where we can.
So much that we can learn from Wisconsin. So we're going to dive into the next 5, and we've got Pam on the line, the NASCA Executive Director, who's kind of going to do a deep dive there. But we definitely learned a lot from Wisconsin. All right, Pam, so kick us off with the next set.
Thank you, Jamie and Secretary Brennan. I appreciate both of your comments, and really the Wisconsin story is a perfect tee up as we're moving into the next 5 of our priorities for our states. Really what Joel was saying is so true. So many things happened in 2020 that have informed not only the work that everyone is doing in the states, but this list of priorities as we look to 2021 and into the future. So many things, again, that we never expected. And I think a couple of the things that you're going to see on the rest of this list perhaps would very unlikely pop into a NASCA top 10, but due to the conditions and what we've had to experience the past now almost 11 months, has become a necessity for our states. You did hear the Secretary talk about the critical importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in procurement, but also in our workforce. Number 6 here on our list, really looking both internally and externally. This is one of the things that we've talked about so much with our members here. This is not only ensuring that we're training our own teams on unconscious or implicit bias, but then how those personal attitudes can impact the work that we're doing around human capital, strategic planning, and all of the work around the workforce, retention, succession planning, what the demographics look like in each of our agencies, definitely a core component of our work for 2021. Also looking directly at our employees, their engagement, their experiences. Again, a total shift from when we're all in person, coming to the office 5 days a week. But now when we're in an overnight remote situation, how do we continue to not only check on our employees, but continue to create the culture that we know is so critically and vitally important for state government? How do we continue to do those touch points? Continue to check in on the well-being of our employees. What's the mental health conditions of those? We're not able to see each other in the office on a normal and routine basis. What are some of those celebratory opportunities that we have now in a remote workforce? Some of our states are seeing some migration back into the office, but at a very, very limited pace. Some states are saying we're going to continue this remote condition for some time. And perhaps the employees at the state level are some of the last to come back into the office. So now what does that do? Again, as we're continuing to check on all of our employees. Strategic workforce planning. This is something that NASCA has been looking at now for some time, but really, how did the global health pandemic ensure that we had to make some changes? Again, you heard the Secretary talk about unemployment insurance, some of the vehicular conditions that had to happen. We've shifted some of our employees. They've gone into roles that perhaps they were not initially employed to do, trained to do. How did that deployment work? What things can we take from that? Some states are saying we are going to have to reduce our headcounts. So again, what does that do to not only just the global landscape of state workforce personnel, but the planning, that total enterprise-wide vision. So let's go to the next slide here and take a look a little bit deeper at strategic workforce planning. If you can see this across the last nearly 10 years, state government has pretty much remained flat over that time. You can see the differences with state and local versus the private sector. And again, we do see that very flat line, less than 1% increase over the last period of 9 years. We do expect more retirements and resignations to come. So again, what does this mean for our strategic planning? And also, we're seeing a decrease in those applications. How do we become that employer of choice? How do we ensure that this is one of the first places an applicant will look to become employed? All right, let's move on to the next slide, please. And then rounding out the top 10, how many of us thought we would ever see supply chain and stockpile management in the top 10 list of priorities for our states? Probably not many of us, but it's very, very real, and it's very, very true. This is something that our states are all grappling with. How long do we need to do this? What does our inventory management look like? Who's in charge? Really, where does this live? This also brings in the whole supplier diversity component as well, kind of a tag along with our DEI and procurement as well. And then finally, workspaces and built space optimization or reduction. I think all of our states are looking at leases, also the privately owned properties. What does that mean when we're starting to hotel or hoteling, the concept of having folks share space? Again, what does that mean for the state as far as the global portfolio, the footprint, cost reductions, etc. So let me again turn to Secretary Brennan and hear a little bit more about Wisconsin's approach to these 5.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. And the slide you put up about workforce and what that looks like is one that really drives home for me. And I'm guessing the experience in Wisconsin and even in our departments is not much different than my colleagues around the country. We did a little event the other day celebrating everything that was accomplished in 2020, despite the challenges, what was accomplished, but also looking forward to 2021. And one of the things we did was we noted retirements that had happened in 2020. And we had about 65 people retire out of our department that's got about 1,200 or 1,300 people, but they brought with them a collective more than 1,000 years of service. And, so when that happens, and we are at a point where I think all of us understand that the services that we have are as necessary as ever. In fact, they're probably in some ways people need us more, and people have understood that there are direct government services that only government can provide, and that we've really been tested and needed to provide those over the last several months. I mean, that's daunting, but it speaks to how both diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee engagement have to be central in what we're doing. We have to rely on people to continue to do what they've done over the core, just the core services that we provide, but also layering on there all of the additional needs that we've had that have been expressed and that really aren't going away over the next several months as we hopefully get to the end of the pandemic and where we're going. The other things that we certainly, on the stockpile management, I don't know that a lot of us thought about supply chain or all those things as much as those who were in procurement certainly did, but when we all were in need of N95 masks, and when there were all of the things that everything that we were looking for our partners in public health and in delivery and making sure we could keep people safe on the front lines, and we could find none of that stuff close to home. I think that's a challenge that we all are grappling with, and this is a federal state challenge as well, but as much as anything, it allows us all to look at how we're all interwoven. And there were any number of occasions where here in Wisconsin, we aligned with our partners in Illinois and Michigan and other places trying to provide or to band together to get the best deal or to get something where there was nothing. And even that was challenging. So we all have to be looking at how we're going to beef those things up and where we're going. On the real estate side, I want to note, your point about hoteling, and again, we've done surveys and we're looking at, as I said, 70% of people, aside from those who work in the prison facilities or in the health facilities or the 24-hour type places, most people are still working remotely, and we expect that to continue for the next several months. But at the same time, we've done continued analysis of their productivity, their preferences moving forward. They are not interested largely in coming back to the workforce, the workplace that they left. And so we're exploring the hoteling options. We've done that in one of our state office buildings here in Madison, but also looking at across the state where else we can do that. By necessity, we are looking at collapsing leases and putting things together. There are other creative things that by the fact of what's gone on over the last year, I think we're exploring more than we would have. The Wisconsin Historical Society has been looking for a place to put their museum. They've been working on this over the last 25 years. We're now looking at co-locating that museum with a state office building project using a really terrific piece of real estate that's got a 50-year-old, 50 or 60-year-old state office building on it that probably has a higher and better use, but can we integrate into that public space and make that something that we can look at for the long term? We also are building a new state office building. Our state capital's in Madison. We have a state office building in Milwaukee, which is the state's largest community. And as we look at that, we're collapsing leases in and around Milwaukee. The size of that building has grown, but generally it's grown because of the services we think that we can align there, even if some of those people are going to be working remotely, and even if we're going to have reached this inflection point where as an employer, we're going to have to be more nimble and we're going to have to be more responsive to those people who are working there. We're also able to bring more things under one roof, not only in the people who are working behind the scenes, but potentially to deliver more direct services to the community and to that part of the state from that location as well. So some of this is born out of the necessity of what we have lived through over the last several months. Some of it is there's certainly lots of these things that those of us in state government and those of us who have been trying to be innovative and all the things that NASCA has had us talking about over the last couple of years, they've simply been elevated or they've been moved forward more quickly than they would have. But us as an employer, our employees are not interested in us having to move exactly backward to where we were when this all started. And I think that's something that's a challenge for people maybe who have been lifers in state government, who are comfortable, because we're all going to be uncomfortable for a while as we work our way through this. But it's absolutely necessary, and we've kind of reached the Rubicon, and there's really no going back, I think, when it comes to our employees and the way that we're going to be delivering those services moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate hearing more about the Wisconsin story. You hit on so many different things, but just one I will leave with all of our members on the call today. Banding together with our colleagues. You mentioned the collaboration and the cooperation among some of your regional counterparts, how critically important that is as well to reach out. Again, we hope NASCA is a vehicle where you can do that, learn from each other, and reach out. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jamie to wrap us up today.
Yes, and thank you, Secretary, so much for talking about Wisconsin. There's so many stories, and there was also something that you said is a lot of these initiatives are things that states have been working on for a long time, either through talking to other states, but this really elevated those initiatives, those innovative initiatives. And so thank you for being on the call to tell your story. We have the NASCA Top 10 on our website for anyone who is watching this live or is watching this recorded later on. Feel free to go to the top 10 and dive in and watch and learn more about all these different topics. We'll be talking more about these throughout the year and sharing NASCA. So NASCA is about peer-to-peer sharing and thought leadership and where the industry is going. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and we will end this session.